Hello, time for another Man and Great book review. Today's book is The Snows of Kilimanjaro and Other Stories by Ernest Hemingway, originally published in 1961. This edition by Scribner was published in 1999. It's 144 pages. This book contains 10 of Ernest Hemingway's most famous short stories, all of which were written in the 1920s and 1930s. Ernest Hemingway, of course, is best known for his novels like The Sun Also Rises, For Whom the Bell Tolls, and Farewell to Arms, and To Have and to Have Not, and others. But for me and for a number of other people, Hemingway's best writing is in his short stories, where his pared down, understated style works better. I mean, I think at the he said, she said kind of bare bones writing of Hemingway, very short sentences, at novel length, to me, gets really tedious. For Whom the Bell Tolls, for example, I think is at least 100 pages longer than it really needs to be. But at the short story length, Hemingway's style works really well. He gets his point across, and many of these stories are quite effective and very powerful. He wrote a whole lot of short stories, especially early in his career. And again, this is a nice little introduction to Hemingway's short stories and his techniques. And I want to go over just a few of four or five examples of some of the 10 stories here. So I'm going to quickly outline the basic plot. There will be some spoilers on some of these if you're concerned about that. So you might want to skip over the next few minutes. The title story, The Snows of Kilimanjaro, takes place in Africa. It's a story it's a semi-autobiographical story. It's about a writer who's on a safari with his wife, and their Jeep breaks down out in the middle of nowhere, and he gets injured, and he gets infected, and he's dying from gangrene. And so it's a long death scene, basically. And during this time period, he's thinking back on his life and his career as a writer, and especially his relationship with his wife. There are some fantasy elements, there's hallucination scenes and so forth. And he's trying to face his death, stoically and without fear, which is, of course, one of Hemingway's big themes in his writing, is the need for a man to be a man, to face stress and the possibility of death stoically and without being a coward about it, and without being afraid. In fact, one of the great lines in From Whom the Bell Tolls is, to worry is as bad as to be afraid. It makes everything more complicated. The next story in the book is A Clear, Well-Lighted Place, which is a story. It takes place in a bar, or basically a cafe/bar, and there's an old man. It's late in the evening, and it's closing time, and there's this old man who's been drinking for hours, and he just won't leave. And the reason he won't leave is because he's got nothing to go home to. He has no family, really has no friends, has no job, and so he just comes to this cafe/bar every night and just drinks heavily until they force him to leave. And there's two waiters, a younger waiter who's anxious to get this guy out so they can close and he can go home, and an older waiter who's much more sympathetic to the old man because he also is old and he also has no family. And so it's basically just the story of this poor, desperate old man who has nothing to look forward to, and so he just stays in this lonely bar and drinks because it's the only home he knows. The next story I want to talk about is called The Killers, and it's one of the Nick Adams stories. Nick Adams Hemingway wrote a whole series of books or stories about a character named Nick Adams, which is basically Hemingway, a fictionalized version of Hemingway. And many of these stories are semi-autobiographical, where he takes stories from his life, events of his life, and kind of repurposes them for fiction. In The Killers, Nick is working in a restaurant, and these two hitmen from Chicago, mafia hitmen from Chicago, come in, and they tie both Nick and the cafe owner up, and they wait, because it turns out they've been sent from Chicago to kill a guy who's a former middleweight boxer, a Swedish guy. Apparently he did something to upset one of the big mafioso in Chicago. He owes them money or something. Anyway, they know he shows up at this cafe every day for lunch, so they're waiting for him to show up so they can kill him. So they tie these two guys up, and most of the story is them waiting around for this Swedish boxer, but he never shows up. And so eventually the two hitmen get tired of waiting and they leave, looking around town. This is a small town where Nick Adams lives, and they're going around trying to find the guy. So the cafe owner and Nick eventually get loose, and Nick goes to the apartment building where the Swedish boxer is to warn him that there's two hitmen out to kill him. But to his surprise, the boxer doesn't really care. He's reached the point in his life where he doesn't care whether he lives or dies anymore. His life is over, he says, and he just sits there waiting for these guys to find him and kill him. And Nick can't understand why he doesn't want to go on with his life. And then the story, the final story is called The Short, Happy Life of Francis Macomber. It's another story that takes place in Africa. It's another story about a guy who's on a safari with his wife, only this one ends quite differently than The Snows of Kilimanjaro. In this one, a lion charges Francis Macomber, and the guy panics and runs. And his wife mocks him for being a coward. And then she goes off and has an affair, a one-night stand with one of the guides, the safari guides. And so Macomber decides he needs to prove his manhood, another big theme of Hemingway. And so a day or so later, he meets a wildebeest who charges him, but this time he doesn't flinch, and he does the manly thing, and stands his ground. And then suddenly he becomes a man, and he has a happy life, but it's a happy life that's short because of something that his wife does to him, which I don't want to reveal. But anyway, this was made into a movie with I think Gregory Peck in the 1950s, which frankly wasn't very good. In fact, I don't think there's ever been a movie based on Hemingway's writing that was very accurate. Are very good. I mean, most of them are kind of mediocre, so forth. Hemingway's writing just doesn't transfer to film particularly well. Anyway, so those are some examples of some of the stories in this book. And again, as I said before, I think Hemingway's writing is at his best in the short story format. Some people do prefer his novels, and that's fine. But if you've only read The Sun Also Rises or Farewell to Arms, or you haven't read Hemingway at all, this is a really good introduction to his short stories. Again, he wrote a whole bunch of these, and so some, of course, are better than others. And there's some of his famous ones that aren't in here, but this is a nice introduction to some of the standard great Hemingway stories. The book is The Snows of Kilimanjaro and Other Stories. The author is Ernest Hemingway. This has been another Man in Gray book review. Thanks for watching.